So this slideshow will focus primarily on the families of children with disabilities. So in previous chapters, poverty, a child's socioeconomic status does impact their health and well-being. And for those who live in poverty, it affects their five main domains of life. And here they are spelled out very clearly in the kind of like the line chart, if you so call it. Excuse me. They have health, and of course that kind of goes hand in hand. If a child does not have access to good nutrition, or maybe they have sporadic times for feeding, that impacts their development. It also impacts their overall immune system. Poverty also impacts an individual's ability to be productive. And so they may have delayed cognitive development and underachieve based off of the fact that they haven't had a good night's rest, or they don't have enough food to actually power the brain. And so all of that plays a role in them being a productive child, whether they're in a child care setting or if they're in school, but also just being a productive member of society. Even having limited access to leisure. If a child is constantly worrying about their own basic needs, including safety, they may not just have the time to play. And if they do have time to play, they may not be able to relax to play. Physical environment is impacted. As in the last chapter, we talked about lead possibly being something that could be in the environment that is a risk factor for disability. For this slideshow, it basically is focusing on the home. If it's in need of a lot of repair, if it's overcrowding, if there's too many people living there, then there are beds. If it's not clean, lead is mentioned again. Of course, the neighborhood plays a role in the physical environment. And not just the immediate neighbors, but if it's a single family home, if it's a townhome, if it's a huge building, how many people are actually crammed into one space, and what resources are available in the neighborhood. And then of course, safety also plays a role in the physical environment. And all of this obviously has its toll on a student's well-being. It can cause increased stress. They may develop low self-esteem, and then of course family interaction. So all of these things impact how poverty affects the child, and there's things that need to be taken into consideration when you're working with someone who has a child with disability. Let's see. So when it comes to finding out, and I know this all too well, the family's reaction to a child's disability, the thing that impacts, these are the two basic characteristics that impact the most. Of course, the characteristics of the child's disability. Not to say that ADHD is, not that big of a deal, but it is the #1 diagnosis in the college setting. And so it has become more so very commonplace to hear people talk about having ADHD. I kind of feel like there's less stigma around just sharing with others that, their child has ADHD or they as an adult have ADHD. But the characteristics of it may not necessarily impact the family as much as it would someone who may have has a child who has a lot of medical needs, or if they have, they're fed by a tube, or if they have, or in my son's case, a lot of disruptive behaviors that would impact not only my experience at church, but also, other parishioners as well. The characteristics of the family have to be taken into consideration. Growing up, we were a family of 4, 2 parents, and mom and dad, and just 1 sister. Didn't grow up with boys, and then here I am married, and we have 1 son. And once again now, well, not once again, but now I'm the minority in the house because I'm the only female, even though all the pets are pretty much male. And I say pretty much because I don't know if my tortoise is male or female just yet, but that's another story. And my husband he came from a pretty large family, 6 of them, and let me see, 6. Yes, 6, yeah. 5, he has three sisters and two brothers, total six children and his mom and dad. So these are all things that play a role in that you have to take into consideration: the cultural background, the religious beliefs. All these things play a role because in research shows that um, minority families are more resistant to reaching out to receive services. In the following slides, we're going to talk about formal supports and natural supports. And when you look at a child, or when you have a child in your child care facility or in your classroom, um, sometimes it helps as the provider to not only look at how it's impacting let's say the classroom or the daycare facility, and this, of course, the children there, but also what factors are playing a role at home that might be either catering to behavior at school, or you may be able to offer some advice to the parents, of course, at a very cautious, in a cautious manner, but just to kind of say like, hey, there's, these are some things that are working here. As I shared previously, supports are available, formal supports, and then there's also those natural or slash informal supports. Formal supports are very much self-explanatory. These are people that are coming into your life on a professional role, whether it's a counselor that's coming in through your health insurance, or maybe a service that's offered through the state. It could also mean teachers. Teachers are a formal support for families with children with disabilities. And then you also have those natural slash informal supports. And those are the people who are part of their everyday life. And of course, that's the people that the child is living with. But the natural supports may also include other family members. My mother, when she was alive, was very much involved in my son's life. That was her buddy, and they had a very, very special relationship. And because of her experience in early childhood education, she was really able to pour a lot of, I guess I could say, strategies and techniques into me, and directly into Caleb. Natural supports can also include friends and communities. It was helpful for me to get involved with the community here. And once we moved here in 2008, it was recommended I get involved with the San Diego chapter of the Autism Society of America, and joined the board, and eventually became the president for 2 years. And it opened up so much information and so much networking that I immediately poured into Caleb, and he was able to do, we were able to find out about surf camp and different camps, just different summer camps that were available just for individuals with autism, like Camp I Can, through the YMCA. And the YMCA is a great place to look for resources for children in general with disabilities, which would also look good in your resource manual, because they have special programs just for children with disabilities. And that's not something that you're going to readily find implemented in such a huge program. Sometimes it's a one-off, but they have a pretty robust program just for individuals with disabilities. And excuse me, in my opinion, I think they do a great job of integrating and including everyone. Churches, temples, mosques, synagogues, these are different places that people will lean into for support. Counselors, therapists, parent-to-parent support was very helpful for me. There's different community groups. Another resource that you might want to check out for your resource manual is Meetup. And of course, you have to be careful, just like in anything, in trying to connect with people online. But Meetup works where basically you go in and you type in photography and say San Diego, and then all of a sudden there's a group of other people who may have already established a meetup. And so to bring it back to just this class, there have been people who have done like coffee chats, when once upon a time we could just go to Starbucks or to our local coffee shop and sit down and have a frappuccino or something yummy. There will be these meetups. And so they would say, Autism Mom Coffee Chat North County, and they'll give a location, and then you just basically show up. So there's safety in that, of course, because you're in somewhere public, and, but the hope and the goal is that when you get together, it's like, okay, now here we are, all parents of, maybe living in North County or near North County, and we all have children who are male and on the spectrum with behavior. So when you get together, you're immediately connected with people who have either gone through it or are going through it, and you don't feel so by yourself. and it helps, it really, really helps. And then respite care is another great resource that's available. It is a resource that's available through the Regional Center as well as YMCA. Another resource that would be great and is applicable to all disabilities is the ARC, and that's ARC. And basically it stands for a resource for community. It's something very, very simple. But if you go to Google, type in ARC, San Diego Disabilities, it'll pull it right up. I can't remember the website off the top of my head, but they have great resources they offer. Although now we're in the middle of COVID-19, I'm not really sure what camps and things they're doing, but they used to offer things like not only people coming to your house and providing respite care, which is basically babysitting, but they don't call it babysitting because these aren't babies, of course. But respite means rest. So they're offering a period of rest for the parents or the guardians. But in addition to offering respite care workers, respite care through their respite care workers, they also offer just weekend camps. And so basically they'll come by and you drop off your adult child or teenage adult child, and or teenage soon to be adult child, and they take them to camps, and they may go out to Alpine for the weekend, or they do summer camps, and then once again you're giving the family an opportunity to rest. Now that we're in the midst of this, I'm not really sure how it's going to all land, but the ARC, is another great resource for your manual. The parents' rights. Back in chapter 1 and 2, we talked about IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And here is these are once again, the parents continue to have the right to be informed and give consent for their child's education plan. They have the right to participate in placement, and not only in the classroom, but as well as the school and the program decisions. They have a right to due process, and that may consist of mediation and a hearing. And that's when you, as the family member, as the parent or the guardian, do not agree with the school district's decision. And so then you can go through mediation to hopefully come to some common ground. And then all parents have the right to not participate in their child's education plan development. It's important when you're working with families to also take into consideration their culture, I should say. I was looking at the word cultural reciprocity there. But it's important for you to take that into consideration because it will play a role in how the information is received from you and whether or not they will go ahead and continue to trust you as far as their child's educator is concerned, or child care provider is concerned, or not trust you, basically. So it's important that take the time to review the IEP prior to meeting with the family. It's also important to identify any cultural values that you are aware of. So if the student has been in someone else's classroom, it could be very helpful to go and talk to the former teacher, former aide, someone who has had some type of relationship with the child before they came to your class. Find out whether the family being served recognizes and values these assumptions, because some assumptions go with culture, different cultures that those are part of that culture readily accept. And then there's other assumptions that they don't accept and they may push back as, because they see them as negative. So it's important to not necessarily walk in and ask them if they believe the stereotypes about their culture are, true, but basically lean into your own emotional intelligence and kind of follow their lead. You want to acknowledge and give explicit respect to any cultural differences identified. So it isn't so much about walking in and saying, oh yes, I'm aware that working with, those from Somalia, where the husband does all the talking and the wife doesn't, you don't have to go in and actually say it. You just actually go in and just do it, and the reason why I focus on number 3 is because I made the mistake when I was more active with the Autism Society of San Diego. We were asked to go speak at one of the, it was a community event, and there was a higher number of those from the Somalian culture being diagnosed with autism. And so the families were getting upset and, not understanding, this wasn't a thing where they used to live and now here they are, and this is a problem. And so they asked the Autism Society to come out and speak, and we did. And I was the only one on the panel who did not do my homework. The other ladies and the one other man who was on the panel worked for San Diego Unified, and so they were very much aware of the culture in City Heights. I wasn't. First time in City Heights was that evening, and so I happened to be one of the first ones to start talking and did not read the room well. I completely acknowledge it because I learned from my mistake, and so I'm sharing it with you, so hopefully you'll learn from yours. Did not read the room, but I did notice, but didn't notice enough to change didn't notice enough to change my thinking pattern and or to ask anyone. But I noticed that immediately to the left were all the men, and they seemed to be seated according to age. And no, I did not know their individual ages, but you could tell the elders were at the front, and it seemed like as you look, row by row, the ages went down to little kids all the way in the back row. Then on the right side of the room were all the women, including young girls. Of course, I noticed their garb, but once I started talking, I talked directly to the women, which at the time I thought was more than appropriate, because I made the assumption based off of being an American, most of the time it's the women who run lead when it comes to these parent groups and parent teacher conferences. And it's not to say that dads don't, because dads have been there, and my dad has gone to things for me as well as a kid, but based on my experience, it's just it was normal and natural for me to start talking to the women's side. I only got to talk once, and it was because basically, because I had to say what I had to say, then wait for it to be translated. Once again, didn't read the room because the translator was only talking to the men. She never acknowledged the women, but I was talking to the women. So the men immediately didn't want to hear anything from me anymore because I blatantly disrespected them by not speaking to them, like talking to them versus the women. And honest mistake, I will not ever make it again. I didn't understand why at the time. I didn't understand why I wasn't being asked any more questions. But then afterwards, it was just like, not only was it explained to me why I wasn't asked any questions, I was asked not to come back and speak to them anymore. And it was just like, well, I didn't know. And, I got, in the moment I got annoyed, inwardly, and I was just like, someone should have told me. But then one of my other good friends, who happens to also be a professor for Point Loma, Dr. Grace Pantaroni, she was like, well, don't worry about it. If you haven't ever been exposed to it, you wouldn't have known. And I was just like, but I would have appreciated a heads up, even if it's just something that had been given to all of Autism Society. Because we do have sometimes, at the time, we used to have a fair number of Somalian families that would attend certain events. And I was just like, well, we naturally walk up and immediately start talking to the mom, always. It's just what we do. And so once I shared that experience in a board meeting, everyone made a mental note because they just weren't aware. If you're not already in the school system and or already working in City Heights or just aware of the Somalian culture, I dare to say that you just wouldn't know. And, so learn from my mistakes and take the time to get to know the culture that you're dealing with so that you can make informed decisions around them. Let's see. So all children bring something positive to all families. And they can be a source of joy, providing a meaning for your life, a purpose for your life. They give and receive love. All the things that are listed here is everything that any child or any person would bring to a family, disability or not. But I think it's important to just share it here because sometimes society will have you feeling that, oh, I'm so sorry your kid has autism. Oh, I'm so sorry, and it's just like, well, as a family, we figured out a way forward. He's happy. I mean, even to this day, Caleb is a very happy guy. So I don't need your sorry. I don't need your pity because, as long as he's happy and he's good and he's healthy, then I'm happy and good and healthy. Well, healthy, but you know what I mean? I'm happy also with, how things have turned out. It could have gone a number of different ways, and we're still navigating some things because hopefully by I don't know when. I used to have a deadline and I took away the deadline because that just frustrated me. But at some point, I would love for Caleb to be able to move back home. Of course, that would mean his behaviors will definitely have to have improved even more significantly, and coping strategies for home, as well as in probably reteaching my husband and I, because we've gone through parent training uh, with Caleb because we just weren't communicating the correct way. The way we had been raised wasn't the way that would work for him, and with sometimes with those on the spectrum, not all, but definitely my kid, it's best to communicate with him by offering if thens, like if you do this, then you get iPad, or to basically go into negotiation on everything. He's like, you basically put out all the things like, wow, we got to do X, Y, and Z today. I wonder which one we're going to do first. Whereas in reality, and I shouldn't say reality, but in my norm growing up, it was basically like, you've got your chores on Saturday. You need to do them before this time in order to go hang out with your friends later. Or you don't get the car keys until these things are done. And so it was never a negotiation. My dad was an officer in the Army. Yeah, right. If I tried to negotiate, it would just get completely shut down and restrictions. So there was no negotiations ever. It was basically, you know what you're supposed to do, govern yourself accordingly. And so, thinking that I could go in and start doing that exact same thing with my son, did not work out well. So I had to go back and retrain myself and go through different types of parent trainings just to learn how to communicate more effectively with my kid on the spectrum. So here's the wrap up. It has more information in the wrap up than in previous chapters. There's also no video in this one, but it's kind of self-explanatory. We're all a part of families. I'm going to jump out there and make an assumption that we have all had at least one family member who has had some type of disability at some point in their lives. And when I say that, keep in mind, diagnosis doesn't mean disability, but if you're dealing with situational anxiety, which a lot of people are dealing with right now, situational depression, and situational meaning take out situational and put in COVID-19, coronavirus, just all the uncertainty in the world. We're all dealing with something that's out of our norm that is causing us possibly to act in a different way. So with the wrap up, we talked about how poverty impacts every aspect of a person's life. Family's reaction is impacted by the disability and the family characteristics, which are pretty self-explanatory and kind of common sense, if you look at it that way. Family supports can be informal or formal. And I'm sorry, I made an error there because I said informal and informal, so I will correct that before I upload it in a few minutes. Parents have rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and they also have the right to not participate in their child's IEP at any given time. And of course, they have to put that in writing, and there's a spot on the IEP for the parent to actually check off and sign if he or she chooses that route. It's important that we consider culture when we're communicating with them. And I said initially, but also, for the entire time you're communicating with the family. I think it's also important to identify your assumptions prior to walking in and then quality check them to reality. And I put quality check them because based on what I thought going into giving that presentation to the Somalian group, like if I just quality checked what I had already thought, I would not have ostracized myself in that particular meeting. And a child with a disability, just like any child, has much to offer families. Thank you.